So I will take
Uh,
this idea of hayashar be'enav to talk about the idea of truth. Yashar means straight, upright also means honest, decent, but also just willful. Hayashar be'enav meaning whatever I think, whatever I see is the right way to be. And there's a real problem when we talk about doing hayashar be'enav, the idea of doing what is straight, right, proper in my eyes. And that is that all of our decisions are made subjectively, meaning even if I decide to obey, it's an intersubjective thought. So when we try to say to ourselves, well, I will do what is straight in the eyes of the divine, clearly one has one's own conception of what it means to act in the eyes of the divine. So when it comes to acting on truth, doing what is right, we can never escape our subjectivity. And that's why, when the Torah says, do what God wants and do what God commands, that doesn't really solve any serious problem. I mean, it's a good place to start. As I've been teaching, it's a I think required of us to take a wisdom culture as a starting place and not feel that we have to reinvent everything. And when we want to go outside of our wisdom culture, we have to have reasons to do so. This is a basic, what I'll call cultural conservative approach, meaning accept the wisdom of the generations. If we're going to do something different, we should have good reasons for doing so. And I think that's very much part of, part of our national debate, both, in the States and here. Clearly, the culture has made, let's say, for example, uh, gay marriage. Clearly, the inherited culture has made a mistake in not understanding the equal standing of people's wanting to devote to create bonds of sacredness in their lives, regardless of their sexual orientation. So the wisdom handed down a different point of view. What changes? We've opened the boundaries of who can talk and who can register their opinion. This is the the most meaningful side of uh, diversity, meaning everybody gets to talk, of inclusivity. No voices are excluded. And then as we hear each other, we say to ourselves, well, the tradition has made a mistake. And since we're not orthodox, bound in some dogmatic way, we can say to ourselves, well, we'll think a little bit different. But if you look at the history of the United States in this, there's a lot of discussion that went on. There was votes going back and forth, people talking to each other, until the Supreme Court stepped in. And I think the Supreme Court here really didn't, in my opinion, did not decide a constitutional issue as much as it was tuned into, you might say, if I may say it, the wisdom tradition of Americans of what is true, right, and good, and to bring the law up to what people thought, kind of a large consensus of what is right, true, and good. So on one hand, we all make decisions subjectively. On the other hand, what I'll call the inherited wisdom culture, to put it maybe a little less grandly, the way that in our cultural context, we work out what is right, true, and good. And in a liberal democracy, of course, and this is something that Jürgen Habermas, one of my favorite philosophers, drives home. In a liberal democracy, it means engaging with each other, listening to each other, as in a way, axiomatically, not just repeating my dogma, which means I have an axiom to grow in wisdom, and that is listen to others who think differently. And if I have a different point of view, I have to reason about it. This is a core part of moral thinking, by the way, the idea of reasoning. Most people don't think about it. That yes, I'm a moral realist, not an absolutist. I'm a realist in that I think that there really are better and worse answers to moral questions. I mean, that's axiomatic. I'm dogmatic about that, which means if someone said to me, there are no moral answers to questions, I would just say, actually, I'm dogmatically, existentially attached to the idea that there are better and worse answers to moral questions. That's my definition of moral realism. There really are moral questions. There really are better and worse answers. Uh, but the moral philosophy, ever since the beginning of when, for example, Socrates began to reason about moral issues, reasoning was put in it. Reasoning means if I think differently, I have to have cogent reasons. I can't just do hayashar be'enai. So take a little step further. When I hear Hayashar be'enav, doing what seemed right in his eyes, I'm using that to say the person didn't reason about it. They just wanted it. It was just an unreflective act of will. Because when you sit down and reason, and for me, I think we have to start reasoning from moral axioms. And this is one reason. Although look, I'm religious, I love the Torah. I believe that there is God, not in the traditional sense, but is there divinity? Haim yesh Elohut? Yes. It doesn't speak to me in the way of doing what God wants. Why? Because there are people who do things in God's name that are atrocious, that are horrible. I mean, even here, there are things going on that I really don't like, especially settler violence. As much as people, there's a war between Jews and Arabs, not every Jew and not every Arab, and we will have to learn how to coexist, especially in the territories, whatever the answer is going to be. And the answer is not, to have the sense that it's only going to be Jewish sovereignty and therefore beat up innocent Palestinians. For me, this is violates every Jewish value, and they have reasons. They get airtime, they talk, they're not persuasive, but they have an opinion, and they're saying it's what God wants us to do. And I'm thinking to myself, I think you've made a mistake. I don't think that's true. So even when one says it's what God wants us to do, that doesn't answer a serious question. By the way, advertisement, it's exactly what I'm going to be talking about in my first session of my Theory Thursdays, which is the Socratic dialogue Euthyphro. Because Euthyphro is this very kind of deluded person. I call him the doofus. He's one of the big doofuses in Platonic literature. And Socrates bumps into him and says, "What are you going to do?" And I won't give away the story, but he says, "Oh, I'm going to get it ready to do this." And Socrates says, "Why would you do that?" He says, "Well, that's what the gods want." And Socrates, whoa, 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 can we talk for a minute? And of course, after you read the discussion between Socrates and Euthyphro, you realize why they wanted to kill Socrates. Because anytime you saw someone walking down the road, said, "What do you think? What are you getting ready to do?" And they would say, and they go, "That's Socrates. He made me doubt myself again. I thought I was smart. Now I realize I'm not so smart." And they said, "Let's just get rid of that guy." Anyway, that's for the Torah Thursdays. Oh, add to that. For many reasons, we have decided to invest in the next decade or so of Oratora. We went to the site Teachable, which takes off of us so many things that have we've spent so much time on. But Teachable is not as easy as we wanted it to be. Now, we have lots of people signing for other classes. If you've had trouble signing up, I want to tell you, there's a few dozen people who have made it through. So keep trying. Now, I'm going to put out an offer. If you have signed up for a Teachable class and it was very easy for you to do so, and you're a good pedagogue, would you be willing to coach someone else through the signing up process? Because our assistant Stephanie has a full-time job. She can only give us a few hours a week. We can't devote time to it. So we thought there might be someone who says, "Yeah, I found this Teachable thing really easy. I'm a good pedagogue. I know how to break it down. Someone doesn't know how to sign up. I'll have you get on the phone with." So if that's you, write me, rabbifinley@gmail.com, an email, and maybe I'll have a little bank of tutors to help people find the depth of Torah, the transformation of wisdom, and wonderful Socratic dialogues. Right, back to this. So I've been thinking very deeply about this idea of truth, partly because of the class that I'm taking here in Israel on the book of Genesis with a teacher who is he's inspiring. He's voluble. He talks. People like him, but he has no training in philosophy. And so when people say, "Well, how do you know it's true? And is this true?" He really doesn't know how to answer. And the class gets more and more confused. Like many Israelis, he speaks with authority about things that he knows nothing about. And so when a person speaks with authority about things of which they are ignorant, it's a little bit confusing for people. I think I've been the kind of person that's tried to say, "I haven't thought about that. You might be right. Let me rethink that. That's a really good point." You're not going to hear that. So as I'm listening to the class and I'm seeing that people go into cul-de-sacs and just getting twisted up and asking questions, not getting answers, I thought to myself, if I were just going to create a one-sheet guide, how to talk about truth, I thought to myself, Well, I think I'm going to do it. I'll translate it in Hebrew. And whenever I teach Torah here, I think I might do an initial session on what it means to teach truth, partly because Israelis think about it differently from Americans because they actually know Bible. They've all had a lot of Bible throughout their high school, so they come in with some knowledge, but they have knowledge of the text that's refracted through uh, opinions that stop them from getting at the text. And when they, for example, the idea of God. So we'll be reading a story and they'll say, but isn't God omniscient? Omniscient? And the teacher properly says, not in this text. And they say, well, how can that be? And they start to argue that, but I always heard, I always thought God is omniscient. And then we, again, go down into a cul-de-sac where I think the teacher could just say, in this class, God is not omniscient. And I can't reason you out of it. We just have to move forward and then talk to them after class. So let's just take that example. Is God omniscient? There are so many people that I've bumped into when I, teach Torah informally. I share my approach. They say a truth. God is omniscient. Therefore, what you're saying can't be true. So then my question, of course, is, well, how do you know that to be true? Right? How do you know it to be true that God is all knowing? Typically because that's what I was taught. Sound familiar? That's what I was taught. I said, well, we can reason from the text and realize that what you were taught does not seem to be true. And I bring up all the cases of the text where God is surprised, shocked, dismayed, and does not know what's going to happen next, does not know what's happening in the next room. So the idea of God being all-knowing is just not verified by the biblical text. And they say, clearly, so why do I think this? I say, well, it comes from Aristotle. Aristotle has permeated the Western religious traditions, and I think sometimes to ill effect. Now, the fact that Aristotle thought it, and even in Aristotle's thinking, I don't think it's sustainable. So a person sits and thinks, I've thought this all my life, and I've gotten into so many intellectual quandaries because of this idea. And you showed me in 5 minutes, it's not a biblical idea. And it might not even be a really Aristotelian idea. It's just what people came up with when they thought about the nature of God, the three O's and the B, omniscient, omnipresent, not omnivorous. I always get stuck here. All-knowing and wills the good. The biblical text does not bear out the three O's and the B. That's just an example. A person thinks something is true, they're dogmatically attached to it, but they've never reasoned about it. For example, is it a biblical idea? Well, then reason from the biblical text. Is it an Aristotelian idea? Go look at Aristotle. And in many ways, good time, beneficial time studying text was wasted with these ideas that don't lead us anywhere. So I want to say a few words about when we say that something is true, what do we mean? First of all, I want to move off the table what's called the correspondence theory of truth. And I want to teach you this because I don't want you to get stuck in these cul-de-sacs of thinking where you can't move forward in your thinking about religion, philosophy, and so forth, because you have something in your thinking that impede your progress. So the major theory of truth that is used is called the correspondence theory of truth, which is statements or propositions should accord with reality. It's raining outside. I peek out my window. It's raining outside. So these kinds of statements have a quality called verifiability. If a statement is verifiable, okay, it's a claim of truth, but you can verify it. So you don't have to accept it dogmatically on faith, but you realize there is some path of verifiability. Now, verifiable truths, I think they're important. So, for example, when people would say that, the discussion today, the Zionists stole land, I think, well, that's a statement, that's a proposition, that's verifiable. Let's go back into Zionist history, and one realizes no land was ever stolen. Well, the Jews took the land from the Palestinians. Actually, it's the British who gave the mandate to the United Nations. It's the United Nations that divided the land. It wasn't the Jews, it was the United Nations, right? So take that proposition back. And it's the Arab side that began a war to annihilate the state of Israel, which means the partition plan was now defunct. I think these are things that are true, meaning verifiable, that anybody can check. Now, you're not going to get that far with many discussions with people because they are attached to a non-verifiable reality because it serves their purposes, which is, for all the modern thinking about truth, beginning, by the way, with Sir Francis Bacon. Um, the 1500s, they were trying to think about what is an intelligent person. He has pages and pages and pages on why people make mistakes in their thinking because they accept what someone told them without reasoning about it themselves and trying to see whether a truth claim is verifiable. So whenever people talk about something where the word truth comes in, think about yourself, falsifiability. Is it verifiable? And how do we verify it? Do we verify it through reasoning? Do we verify it by looking and doing some research, right? So that's one set of truths. Now, now there's another set of truth where people will say something like, I can't define truth, but I know it when I see it. Okay? Now, that's an interesting statement, but I don't think we should let it go at that. Because what people are saying, and again, I think it's really well to think about these things. If I say, I can't define truth, but I know it when I see it, I'm making a statement of a criterion in my inner life that is evoked when I see or hear something. So the word I can't define it true because truth, like love, justice, beauty, the good, are undefinable. That's another very important for everybody to know who wants to do serious work in religion, philosophy, moral philosophy. There are some words that are not definable. I love the way, I think it's G.E. Moore said it. They're not transparent. You're not going to see through the word and find some deeper version of it until you get all the way to the final definition. Terms such as love, justice, truth, and beauty are the final words. If you look through the word good, you're going to get to the right. And the true, you go to the right, you're going to end up with the good. There's a certain point where certain words all entail each other, which means you might as well stop trying to define a word as if there's something behind it, as if it's transparent or something deeper that you can see, but rather seeing that these words are symbols. There's symbols. There's, and again, this, if you haven't studied philosophy of the language, Suzanne K. Langer's book, Philosophy in a New Key, which I is one of the 8 books in my suitcase. I'll hope to teach someday, but she makes a really great argument. Certain words function as symbols of a reality that we cannot define, but which is inexhaustible. So when you take the word truth, okay, clearly it has a phonological sense. We say that, Wahrheit in German and Emet in Hebrew. But you take that word and you can't define it, it evokes a whole world of thinking and study. And as you study this idea, you start to study, well, there are some truths are verifiable, some truths are falsifiable, and then there's this other area of truth, all evoked by this word. So when I think about from last time what it means to be in a religion, you might say it's an arrangement of myths and symbols that help shape consciousness. For example, God is a symbol. When people say, do you believe in God? You know that I say, I don't think in the way that you think. And they say, what do you mean? I said, I feel myself to be a God knower. I don't believe in God as in accept a set of propositions about God. Well, do you obey God? I said, if you mean the laws of the Torah, well, no. Well, then what kind of Jew are you? This kind of Jew. So, but the term God is a symbol that evokes a kind of thinking. So Paul Ricoeur wrote a wonderful essay called "The Symbol Gives Rise to Thought." You can memorize that. I think that is true, right? A sign points at something. A symbol suggests an undefinable reality that a reflective person must engage. So, as I've said earlier, truth is something you study. You don't have it, you don't define it, but it causes you to turn your thinking in a certain direction. Okay, so let's take this. I know it when I feel it, or I have my truth. So I would prefer that we not use the word truth for subjective truth, but rather use point of view, the way I see things, and reserve the word truth when there's no other word to use. So let's say I say, by and large, the United States of America is a force for good in the world versus, well, that's just your opinion. I say, it's my opinion. It's not just my opinion. Okay. It's a point of view that I think I can reasonably back up. I might be wrong, but if you think I'm wrong, give me reasons. And let's just not stop with, well, this is my truth, that's your truth, because I think that that phraseology is very sophomoric, which means people can't get to their junior year in college if they think that I have my truth and you have your truth. So when anybody says that, I think we should be gentle and say, do you mean you have a point of view and that I have a point of view? And there might be something that is more true, more verifiable than either of us. And then we need to reason about it. Now, this startles people because they think that, that what they think is true is the gold standard for truth. And of course, I don't think, there's an example. I don't think that that word is true, meaning just because someone thinks it, it is not falsifiable. People say things that I can falsify. People say things that are not verifiable. So I would dispense with my truth, your truth, and use my point of view, your point of view, and then ask the question, verifiable, falsifiable. If it's not verifiable or falsifiable, okay, we might call it some kind of an axiom, meaning it's a basic idea. For example, my statement that there are better and worse answers to moral questions. Okay? So I'm taking the symbol moral and adding a little bit of substance to it. That what I just said is not falsifiable. You can't give me evidence why it's not true, but nor can I verify it. So when you start thinking about things, you start to get at certain propositions that are not falsifiable, which means I can't prove you wrong, nor are they verifiable. Person can't prove that they're right. So we're going to call those somehow axiomatic statements or basic statements about the reality of things. So again, when a person says, I feel that to be true, I'm wondering, is that a point of view? Or have you encountered some kind of axiom? And if you've encountered an axiom, would you please share it? Now, I'm suggesting that we all should do this. And when you hear people struggling, is there a God? Is there not a God? You can pause and say, well, it's not falsifiable and it's not verifiable. So it's kind of an axiom. So when you say there is God, can you tell me what that means? If they mean the God of the Bible, some people say to me, I don't believe in the God of the Bible. And there's a kind of a falsifiability of the providence of God, and it has caused me to think of much deeper ways to think about God, where I end up at something axiomatic. All right, so briefly, what do we mean when we say I've encountered a truth? For example, the last line in the poem that was read tonight. The last line of the poem that was read tonight was set up beautifully in a very colloquial kind of thinking that led us to a certain point, metaphoric point in space, also point in time, where the light is there and then it's not there. And light here, the way I interpret it, the way to live my life, the light on the road, being enlightened, knowing the truth. We flicker in and flicker out. Now that is for me, a statement of truth. So you would say, hey, Finley, why does that feel true to you? Meaning, why, when you read that, did something in me, the inner criterion of truth statement, did it pop up and say, that's true? Now, you see, this is where we track back to self-knowledge. What in me was so moved by the line, that's where we live. The light flickers on and flickers off. I take a step forward, I can see it. Take a step back, I'm in utter darkness. So it reflected a metaphorical reality that rang true to me. Another way of saying it, it helped me express my existential experience as a human being. And I think that's one of the main ways we use the word truth. I hear a statement that reflects my deepest experience as a human being. So this is not that it's not so much that it's subjective. Of course, it's subjective. At some level, we always process the world subjectively. But in my subjective processing the world, are some things that are said somehow reach my core, reach my soul. And therefore, I think what we call truth is somehow connected to the knowledge of the soul, not the knowledge of the ego mind, not what I feel, not why emotions are, It's deeper than feeling. It's deeper than emotion. It's actually deeper than thoughts. These statements that register as true in the soul give rise to thought. I want to go back to Paul Ricoeur's statement. The symbol gives rise to thought. So look at the poem as a symbol, meaning it is not a prosaic fact, falsifiable, verifiable fact statement. It's taking us on a journey, beautiful journey, to come to this line where we say, that's true. So when a person says a poem is true, the movie is true, it's reflecting our deepest experience as human beings that can propel us into a kind of thinking. So the last thing I want to say tonight is, what does that have to do with God? So when I think about what it means to be a God knower as opposed to a believer, I think my experience of God and my experience of truth are in some ways fundamentally identical. Okay? So the God experience, you might say, and if we call the soul where human consciousness at its deepest interfaces with divine consciousness, and I hear something that's a life existential truth, for me, that sometimes is an experience of God. So experiencing a truth for me is an experience of God. I feel holiness suffusing through my body, as I say when we light candles. And that's when I say I don't believe in God. I experience God. I know God. But when especially do I experience God? In moments when I'm confronted by an existential life truth that gives meaning and expresses the deepest experience of my life. And from that, it propels me into a kind of a deep thinking about the meaning of my life. Okay, so to take it back to a more a prosaic area. So I'm taking an Ulpan in Hebrew. It's an advanced class. Pretty much at the same level. We have very, very good Hebrew. We lack slang. We lack fluency. And we're just trying to, sound more like Israeli. So we have a wonderful teacher. She's a dancer and an actress and a lawyer and, very kind of up 30-year-old, throws Hebrew slang around back and forth. And most of us in our, the youngest age is maybe in our 20s. The rest of us are 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we all want to be more Israelis. So, she throws out things such as, Hayim Kashim, life is difficult. Hayim Him Pshara, life is all compromise. So she's saying things that Israelis say. And so this idea, life is compromise. I thought to myself, not exactly. Sometimes life is, I'm not going to back down. Sometimes life is, I will die right here. I will not compromise. I've reached my final point. So when she said life is compromise, I didn't say this in class, obviously, but I tried it on. It's a little bit true. Yeah, it's true enough. You can throw that one out here and there. But there are sometimes when a person says, but Rabbi Finley, isn't life compromise? I said, depends on what's happening. Because sometimes, that's where you draw the line, a real line. So could I say sometimes life is compromise and sometimes life is drawing the line? Yeah, that sounds kind of true. I don't know which and when. So it hasn't helped me solve any problems, but at least it's told a little bit about what it means to be a human being. So when people are reading the text, they say, is it a, Torah Temet? Is it a Torah of truth? I say, okay. So, and again, the person teaching the class has not studied theories of truth and validation and Gadamer's Wahrheit und Methode, truth and method. So I've studied these things at a graduate level, and so I don't fault him for not knowing this. But as I said in class, I'm thinking to myself, I'm so glad I learned this stuff because I can organize it. Okay, so studying the text, by the way, one says, is the text true? What does that mean? Is it historical? Obviously not. If you believe it's historical, we're having a different discussion. So let's say it is an ahistorical text. It's a narrative, but does not even propose to say about things that happened. We have as a mythic quality to it. So is there a word called myth, which means a narrative functioning at a direction of we're telling a story to communicate a life truth in a narratival way. Therefore, it's functioning as a symbol. You following my thought? Therefore, when one studies Bible, does one encounter truth, either in pithy statements like a proverb or something, or in narratives that have a mythic quality, meaning it's not what happened then, it's what happens all the time. So let's say I believe that to be true. So when I'm studying, as I'll be teaching soon, the first 4 chapters of Genesis, I hope we get past the first chapter. We might not. I read it, I study it, I plumb the depths, and I encounter one moment after another where the text has gone into me and evoked truth, which for me feels like poetic truth, deep truth, which sometimes creates an aperture where the divine spirit flows in. And so when people say, did God write the Torah? I said, God is evoked by studying Torah. So I'm not reading the stories dogmatically. Well, this is the word of God. Whoever wrote it, and it was deposited into history and included in the canon, and I'm studying it and I'm discovering new things about it all the time. And I stop and contemplate, and I can feel something really deep, that a life truth just got put into my life. And I experience that moment, and I feel certainly a moment of depth and sometimes a moment of the divine. So I wanted to offer this to you about what we mean by truth. I'm offering you just one complex idea. Beyond correspondence theory of truth, falsifiable truth, verifiable truth, I want us to think of moments of truth. When you read something, saw something, heard something, a movie, a poem, affected you deeply, to think for a moment and say, what just happened? Somehow it got ingested into my soul, which means there's not a conscious criterion, there's a mysterious criterion that said, there's truth being spoken here. And it evokes something within. And then take a moment, and I think this is part of the mitzvah of reflection that I talked about the first on our steps to Rosh Hashanah. Reflect on it. Think of reflection as a priori mitzvah. Unexamined life is not worth living. It all starts with self-knowledge. It starts with reflection. If a line of a poem, a movie taps into that deepest part of my soul and opens an aperture where the divine can flow in, that's something I need to reflect on. So I'm going to call that a truth moment. All right. So when a person says, my truth, your truth, okay, with their permission, I would say, are you saying that there are things that you experience subjectively that take you to a deep moment of truth? Is that what you're saying when you say my truth? Are you saying my subjective experience of things that are existentially true? I've actually said that to a few people, and they've said to me, thank you so much for that. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. I just didn't have those words. So I want to share that with you. Right. Sometimes I read something, see something. It goes so deep inside of me. It feels like it's hit the core of my existence. I see my life new and differently and deeper and more beautiful and more tragic and everything else. And I'm going to try to see that I saw. I want to share with you. I picked up another. Tel Aviv. So this bookstore that I share with you that's filled with hidden mystics. Every time I go in, I buy a thin book, only thin books. So I bought a very super thin book on Aquinas. I love studying Aquinas. And so the author of this book put in a quote by Dante as the imprimatur of the book. And it said, this is from Canto 26, the 26th little chapter. And so I had to go on the internet and look up the context, and it says the following. It says, now I'm going to miss, it's at the end of number 26. It says, you were not meant to live as brutes. You were meant to follow light, wisdom, and truth. Okay. So I picked up a book because when I go to the bookstore, I have to buy a book. I got to buy a thin book. Aquinas. I open it up. I'm sitting in a in a bar, by the way, just you got the house and need a little bit of light and drink some soda water. And I'm looking at it, and then I go look up Dante, and I'm reading the whole number 26. And it was deep. It was very deep. And reading Dante and starting Aquinas and reflecting all this, it was like a moment of truth. It was a deep, I just really powerful. I had to memorize the moment and say, okay, I'm done. Get out of here and go somewhere else because it got to be a little bit too deep. I didn't want to start, weeping in the bar. So I had to get myself out of there. Anyway, so that's what I want to offer to you. What do we mean by truth? Something that goes down to that place, your life deepens. Somehow life makes sense in a way that it never made sense before. You memorize that moment. You feel in touch with your reality. You feel in touch with humanity. As Rilke said, you must change your life, and you have that moment. You memorize it. You register it. You engrave it, and go on with your day.